Thank you, Katie. Good to see many of you here joining the webinar this morning. Thanks for being part of this conversation, and I hope that you find it helpful. Prevention at Compass Mark is the bread and butter of what we do every day. It's our sole purpose as an organization. And so we're just really thrilled to be able to talk with you about what prevention looks like, why it's important in our community right now, and answer any questions that you might have about the ways in which prevention is done in our community. Our staff, several of them are joining us today, are really passionate about this work, and so I'm really excited to let them speak to the ways that they're doing important skill building prevention work in the community right now. Just a little bit of an overview about Compass Mark for those that may be joining us for the first time or curious about what we're all about. We have been doing prevention work here in our community for over 50 years. Compass Mark is a nonprofit organization. We were founded as the Lancaster chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism in 1966. And at that time, alcoholism was really just starting to be identified as a public health concern. And the organization was very groundbreaking in our work to educate about the disease of alcoholism and provide resources and a lot of advocacy work in the community. As the organization has grown, for many, many years, we were known as the Council on Drug and Alcohol Abuse. Some of you just know us as the Council. And during that time, we expanded to do a lot more intervention and some treatment services for a whole range of substance use disorders. And it was really in around 2008 when we took the name Compass Mark that we really solidified our space in prevention. And so our mission as an organization is to prevent addiction through education, skill building, and community mobilization. Really, that name Compass Mark speaks to the way in which we do our work, which is to guide and empower people and help them find the path towards health and resiliency. And you're going to be hearing more about the ways that we do that across different sectors of our community in a few moments. Our primary office here is in Lancaster, and about 10 years ago, we opened a small office in Lebanon County. We serve that community as well. And just in the past couple of weeks, we have announced that we're going to be providing expanded services in Chester County, which is really exciting. And we'll be opening a small office down there very shortly. So our programs, some of you may be familiar. For those that aren't, just real quickly, the Addiction Resource Center is one of our primary ways in which we disseminate information in the community around addiction. There's an information referral service that we can provide, which is for individuals who may be looking for treatment services or recovery supports. And we can provide, in each of those 3 counties, we can provide resources and guidance on how to identify those programs in the community and connect people through. We also do a lot of community education and speaking events in the community. And right now, of course, that's taking the form of these type of events primarily, but that's really a core part of what we do and continue to do, is to educate around addiction and substance use disorders, as well as problem gambling. Another bucket of programming there is our school-based prevention, and that is really where we work at an early age with kiddos in the community, giving them skills for living a healthy life and increasing their protective factors. That's really done in partnership with school districts in our communities, where we are given opportunities to come in and do classroom sessions or small group sessions using a variety of evidence-based programs. And that's really a big bucket of programming and serves several thousand kids K through 12 every year. Then we have our community-based prevention programs, which is where we do a lot more focused interventions for higher risk populations. So an example of that is our Skills for Life program, which serves youth and young adults from 13 up until 25 or even higher if needed. And those are for individuals who may already be using substances or have a highest level of risk, but in which we can still do some education and give them some skills that they need. And we also work with some families too, because there's a lot of family issues in addiction, and we want to support the parents in knowing how to work with those kiddos as well. We also have our Family Services Advocate Program, which serves children whose parents are incarcerated, and you'll be hearing from Lindsay soon. She operates that program here in Lancaster. And then we have a whole bucket of programming that's just around training and technical assistance. And that includes the Student Assistance Program, which is a state mandated program that happens in the schools. And then we also do a lot of different webinars and trainings for our community to provide education and further our mission. So that's a little overview of what we are and what we do. I am now going to pass it over to Bevan Allen, who is our Director of Operations at Compass Mark. She's been with us for wow, maybe 7 years now, almost 7 years, Bevan. And she really is responsible for overseeing all of our various program areas and our staff who do this amazing work and are so passionate about it. So I'm going to let her introduce our panelists for today.
All right, good deal. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really glad that you can all be with us here today. We'll start off with introducing Josh Mounts. Josh Mounts is a prevention specialist who works primarily out of our Lebanon office. He's also a member of our SAP training team, so that's a really important service that we provide. He's been doing that about a year. We also have Deborah McCoy. Deb is our SAP program coordinator, so she serves SAP training and support needs in all of our counties of service. Amy Seacrest. Amy is our certified prevention specialist, so she works primarily out of our addiction resource center, where a lot of our information and supports and help calls land. And finally, Lindsay Ober. Lindsay has been our family services advocate in Lancaster County for several years. That program provides case management and support to families that are experiencing incarceration of parents. So kiddos are the client, and she works with both the caregiver and the incarcerated parent to provide supports and improve resilience of kiddos experiencing parental incarceration. So with that, I think we're going to slide right into some discussion points. I'll turn it back over to you, Katie. As we're moving along, if anyone has questions, we're going to ask that you pop those questions into the question and answer box rather than the chat, so that we can keep track and make sure we're answering as many as possible.
Great. Thanks, Bevan and Eric. And just to reiterate Bevan's point, your questions are really important to us. So please utilize that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you may have. What we'll do is go through a couple questions that we have prepared for a conversation. And then at the end, we do want to make sure that we allow for time for questions that do appear in the Q&A and throughout the conversation. So if there's anything that pops up, please feel free to throw those questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of our conversation. That being said, we're also recording this. So afterwards, you can feel free to share this with folks in your community. And additionally, what I will do is you'll get a follow-up email from me with the recording, with these panelists' contacts information and any resources that we preface and we want to share with you after the event. So at that point, is everyone ready? Everyone looks ready and ready to share, so I'm excited to share their stories with you. Because many of you may be new to Compass Mark or really unsure of what our programming is, or maybe even unsure of what prevention is, I just want to ask the question to our panelists, what is prevention to you? So Josh, could you kick us off with what is prevention to you? And how would you explain it to our audience today?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. Just very broadly, prevention is about removing barriers. Removing any barriers for a person to live a successful life. So and that's going to look different across all of our different areas, as all the panelists are going to talk about as we go in here. Secondly, prevention is about education. In the world of prevention, we talk a lot about risk and protective factors. Everybody is born and lives in certain risk and protective factors. Our goal is to minimize the risk factors and embolden the protective factors. And again, that looks a little bit differently for each of the panelists, and I'm sure they'll go into detail what that means for them. It also includes educating people about the disease model of addiction and making sure that we understand it is a disease that affects people's brains. It is not a moral short failing. It is not a lack of strength or a sign of weakness. That it is a disease, and when we treat it as such, as a public health issue, that we can have much, much better results. And lastly, when we're talking about community, prevention is about creating connections and creating relationships and creating lasting relationships. Because effective prevention works across boundaries. So it's not just drug and alcohol prevention. The same principles that work for drug and alcohol prevention can also work for mental health, can also work for crime prevention, can also work for domestic violence prevention. So creating those relationships among community partners can help make a broader safety net of prevention in communities.
That's an interesting point considering the entire community. Amy, could you speak to what prevention looks like at home or within the family?
Sure, Katie. I want to first define what we mean by family, because when we talk about family, we just want to be really clear that we mean whatever combination of folks make up family to you, right? And so we don't necessarily mean your family of origin. And also when we're going through here, when we're talking about parenting, really we mean the caregivers for children, right? So whoever is the pivotal people for those children as they're being raised. But inside the family, it's tricky, right? Because you don't have a prevention specialist necessarily living at home with you inside your family. So I'm talking about family today, and the point is to really drive home to people that the family unit is a really powerful source of prevention, even if you don't know exactly what that is yet. And basically, like Josh said, you're strengthening those relationships at home. Also sort of defining for the kids at home, what health is. You get to define that for them. What's healthy and what's not healthy. So we'll talk a little later about some details about that. But it's really just empowering the caregivers and the parents to have really healthy, intimate relationships with the kids at home. And that may sound simplistic, but that goes a long way in doing actually really good prevention.
Great, thanks, Amy. So we're sort of hearing from the community, so starting big and then working our way to smaller groups in a household or within a family. Lindsay, can you talk about what prevention means on an individual basis?
Of course, thank you. So really in my section of the field, prevention is avoiding the development of the disease of addiction, which as Amy and Josh both stated, that it is a disease. It is a disease of the brain. So just like you would get any other disease within your body, it develops in the same sort of way. And that looks different for each person. So where I come from, I'm mainly working with children that have incarcerated parents or parents that are involved with the criminal justice system. So really, it starts with that education piece of educating the child, the family, whoever may be a strong support in that child's life to talk about addiction, since we know that addiction is a large reason why people end up involved with the criminal justice system. So that education piece and really making the child aware of their risk and protective factors, which as Josh said, we will dive into later as well. And then from there, it's about teaching them how to cultivate a healthy lifestyle. So maybe that could look like deciding to hang out with different groups of people or engage in different activities, and really having those choices, because they are choices, become a natural selection for the child. And being able to make those choices on their own is really what comes down to building prevention.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What I'm hearing from the three of you, and just a theme that's been weaving through, is the importance of education and information. And, I hear teaching a lot. Deb, from your perspective, within the realm of education, what does prevention look like in that perspective?
Within the school system, prevention can be either universal, where all students at a grade level or within a building are getting some form of education relating to substance use and abuse. In Pennsylvania, it's a mandate that students receive that kind of education K through 12. So it has to start in kindergarten, goes the whole way up through 12th grade. Many times we find that those educational programs are done in health classes. Sometimes they're embedded in different classes, but it can be that universal education. It can also be specific to kids that maybe have some kind of risk factor that really would identify them as maybe needing more education. What that can look like is support groups that are provided within school by either school staff or agency liaisons through the student assistance program. So it can be either focused or in specific kids, or it can be universal across all students. But the goal is the same with all of those kids. It's to really mitigate risk factors and provide support and really build those protective factors for kids.
That's a good point. So coming back to, I mean, why are we here today? Why is this important? So I'm hearing the importance of mitigating those risk factors. Amy, can you speak to why should we care about this? Why is prevention important?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I alluded to earlier, for the family, which I'm talking about today, you're literally creating a reality for the child, right? So you're passing on your values and beliefs and your knowledge to children. And so you're creating what they believe is healthy or not healthy. And then you're hoping, right? Hoping as parents and caregivers that the kids buy into your definition of what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, what's healthy and not healthy. So, right now we're having even little kids wear masks in public to prevent COVID-19, right? So this is public health, as Josh said, and all diseases, we prevent them the same way by lowering risks and increasing strengths. So in the family, we're hoping to give caregivers and parents just basic skills and also to even let them know that they're doing prevention. That's why it's important we're reaching that population, parents and caregivers, because in the family, good prevention ends up looking like just good parenting a lot of the time. And we're going to go into detail a little later on what actually could we be doing that is prevention. But, we get to teach our kids to brush their teeth, maybe not to smell chemicals or taste chemicals that are under the sink. The Mr. Yuck symbol maybe is placed on them. Mm-hmm. Not to take other people's prescriptions, right? So we're teaching them as they go along, what is health? Maybe I should eat my veggies. So what we're suggesting is that parents get a little information so they can start weaving in drug and alcohol and gambling information, just like you would with all the other health information you're teaching your kid. It can be really basic, but starting really early puts it on their radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Josh, considering the community level, I mean, Amy alluded to it with, a public health, it's of public health importance. Can you speak to, on the community side of it, and the community perspective of why this is so important to the communities? Why is prevention so important to us?
Sure. And just like Amy said, with the family, you kind of get to decide what is the message of being healthy. We get to do the same thing in the community. On a larger scale, it's called social norming. So we get to determine the messages that we send out as a community or that we receive as communities about what it means to be healthy. And that's super important because communities are the combinations of all of these different categories. The nexus all comes together in the community. And so strong communities help foster strong individuals, just as strong individuals help foster stronger communities. So everything is interconnected and it all plays together. When we're talking about risk factors and what's important, the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, the most recent one, across Lebanon County, where I work, and across some of the other counties that I checked out, the two highest risk factors for young people are low neighborhood attachment and lack of recognition for pro-social behavior. So they don't feel connected to the places they come from, and they feel like when they do the right thing, nobody sees it or recognizes it. So that's why it's important for communities to have things like youth athletic leagues or summer playground programs for young people to find that connection to the larger community as a whole. Now, obviously, with everything that's going on this summer, those have been greatly scaled back, and hopefully we can get back to those in the future. But those are some of the larger things on a community level that help encourage participation, can help get that connection back into the community. The other reason it's important is the more education we have about risk and protective factors and about the disease model of addiction, the more that we can bust out stigma. And there is a huge stigma that's involved with substance use and substance issues and gambling issues. And those create barriers. They create barriers to treatment and recovery. People are afraid to talk about what they're going through because of how other people might look at them. It also can create barriers to housing or to employment. And if we don't have access to treatment and recovery, if we don't have access to housing, and we don't have access to employment, that's not going to look really good in our community. It's not going to make us feel really good about the place that we live in. And again, the cool thing about prevention is that anybody can do it. And the more education that we get out there about what exactly prevention is, the more that the community can become involved, and that prevention can work its way from the top down so that everyone has an idea and can help build that strong community.
You brought up one of the main drivers of the importance of prevention, or one of the deterrents for prevention, is that low connectivity. And I think schools often provide this a pillar of connectivity in our communities, because we either work in them, we send our kids to them. Deb, can you speak to the importance of why prevention is important? Prevention education is important in academia and those educational sort of pillars we have in our community.
Really, the goal of prevention is within the school system is to build this, create this healthy foundation for kids, physically, emotionally, mentally, socially, and good prevention does that. Kids are in school for a longer period of time, many times, than anywhere else. They're kind of a captive audience. So you have the ability to provide that necessary education in prevention, mitigate those risk factors, and really build those protective factors. One of the things that we know is that a lot of research is out there indicating that kids are having maybe some more difficulties than they did before. Incidents of anxiety disorder and depressive disorder among kids are higher than they had been in previous years. And adolescents really are in that demographic where kids are they're at more risk than others for substance use and abuse. So when it comes to prevention, we have that audience of kids in that arena where they can make connections with peers that are healthy. They can make connections with school staff that are caring and warm and invested in them. And we know from research and really practical experience that one of the healthiest factors for a kid, really one of the strongest prevention factors, is a strong, nurturing relationship with an adult. And many times they find those adults in school, that caring teacher or that school counselor. I hear constantly in SAP training, student assistance program training, about kids that have really come through some really extraordinarily difficult circumstances because of those connections with an adult that they were really clear they mattered to. And so that's why prevention is really essential within schools.
Thanks, Deb. Lindsay, you had talked about some of the kids that you work with on an individual basis. Can you share some of your experiences around why prevention is so important to them even at the, you know, individual basis. So you have these different tiers of the importance of community, education, and the family unit. But what does that look like, the importance of that on an individual level?
Yeah. So it's super important for both the child and the adult to have safer communities across the board. And that's really just because we as individuals are what make up those different systems. So whether it's the educational system, different social systems that you're involved with, say at church, or you're involved with sports and recreation, or book club, whatever it might be, we as the people are what's making up that larger community.
Right.
So when we set the standard of prevention, for example, if we have a group of kids that are all in the same classroom who might start to experience with drugs, it can almost become sort of a glorified topic. So when we provide that prevention, sorry, my Google Home heard me talking. So when we provide that prevention in the classrooms to our students, and also widespread to parents and adults in the community, we're giving them these other options. We're showing them that there is prevention that's possible here, and that this is not the only way. So I think it's also important to integrate these different prevention gateways or prevention forms on things like social media or right into your sports teams. I've worked with so many kids who say that their coaches or whoever they were working with in drama club is really what kept them out of doing things outside of the home that might not have been so healthy for them or glorified. So I think really the important thing when it comes down to individuals is to remember that each person is making up that broader community, and we want safe environments for everyone involved.
I agree with you. And one thing that kept standing out is this importance of connectivity, whether it's being connected to another person, an institution, just having connectivity is really a key factor in the importance of the why of prevention. But what happens now? I mean, you know, with schools being closed or not having the ability to have access to youth health camps, or, you know, just being able to do a lot of the activities that we normally do to connect to one another, why is prevention especially important now during times when we can't connect? Deb, could you speak to what that looks like? I mean, especially considering education and all the changes that are happening anyway. Why now? You know, why is prevention, in my eyes, more important than ever?
Prevention is more important than ever. And I think it's because of all the difficulties that our kids have experienced. They've been taken away from peers that matter to them in that school setting, from being physically in the presence of adults that matter to them. Their whole school life has been disrupted. And as we go back to school in the fall, it's going to look a wide variety of ways depending on where you are. There are schools that are fully going to have kids return. There are going to be hybrid models. There are kids that are going to be doing virtual school. Consistently through that all, though, is the continuance of student assistance programs, SAP programs. And SAP programs, the goal is to identify barriers to a kid's education, determine whose responsibility it is to deal with those barriers, and remove those barriers. Because of all the difficulty that kids are experiencing, we are anticipating that SAP teams are going to be more essential than ever for our kids in removing that wide range of barriers that are normally there and then are maybe amplified more because of COVID and quarantine, losses that kids have experienced related to COVID. So it really is more essential now than ever that we have that continuance of SAP and other prevention programs, because those are the programs that are really reaching out to kids and providing that support. Sometimes those programs are that soft place for kids to land, that really are that safety net for kids. So it is more essential now than ever before.
Right. Josh, would you agree with that on the community level? of the importance, like now more than ever. I mean, schools are definitely a place where connectivity happens, but in the broader community, why now?
Yeah, definitely, I agree with that. Now more than ever, that connection is important, not only with kids or with individuals, but I had talked about like those agencies working together. We've seen schools partnering with communities for food distribution. We've
Good
seen
point. Yeah.
camps that maybe aren't happening in person anymore, but they're being virtual camps, or churches who are offering vacation Bible school programs that are make and take crafts that they can pick up and take home. That we're trying to provide as much normalcy as possible in a world that is full of uncertainty. But those connections are more important now, and that's why building those strong connections are super important when it comes to prevention.
Right, that makes sense. And especially in the home, Amy, I mean, that's where you're getting maybe the only interaction with anybody for a lot of us. Within the home structure and family, as you've defined it, you know, why now?
Well, of course, there's just an enormous burden on families right now. And I guess the takeaway message from me today is that, you know, there are simple things that parents and caregivers can do or are already doing. And I think it's helpful to know, oh, what I'm already doing, that's prevention. It kind of sustains you. That they can do that is technically, it's addiction prevention. Now, as Josh said at the very beginning, it prevents all kinds of other unhealthy behaviors as well, but likely you're already doing addiction prevention. As we've said, it's based on connection. But I want to give some examples of what parents are doing or what caregivers could sort of increase their frequency of at home right now. So when you have a little one, say a baby through a toddler, you're probably already doing a lot of what we call serve and return. So that's almost a tennis metaphor or a sports metaphor, in that you're just interacting with this baby or this little one, and they're interacting with you. And believe it or not, that is just essential. That's like a baby's biggest job, is to build their brain. And the more you're doing serve and return with a baby, so the baby gets your attention and they giggle and you look back at them and you smile, and maybe you play a little hide and go seek, or maybe they point at something and you point at it also. The simplest things, you are actually helping to build the parts of their brain that have capacity for connection later on. And that is prevention. Another example for parents and caregivers, when we talk about these risk factors and these protective factors, like I said before, you want the kids to buy in to your values, right? And how do we do that? Basically, we become reliable for them. We teach them how to do things. And then when they do them, we just give them some recognition, even if it's quick, even if it's a hug and a kiss, even if it's just a quick thank you. I know, people are stressed right now. So it's very simple, good parenting maybe, but stressed parents and caregivers can know that whenever they're recognizing their child for learning something new, even if it's brief, we have research that says that is effective in bonding them to you. And when they're bonded, they buy into your value system. And your value system, my third point, needs to be clear. And so I mentioned earlier that we talk to kids about brushing their teeth. As they get older, you give them more information on why. We want them to eat their veggies. And when they're little, you just try to get some in their mouth. But as they get older, you explain more and more why we want you to eat your veggies. Well, if we were having conversations around drugs, alcohol, and gambling, age appropriate, from as early as possible, we would be building, first of all, our capacity just to have conversations about it. And second of all, building a value system for the kids. This is not ensuring they're not going to try them, right? But if you don't build that system in, they're much more likely to try that. So we have, if you wouldn't mind sharing, Eric, the 5 tips for conversations. We're going to make sure you get this document after this webinar. But we want you to be as clear and overt about what you think about your kids using drugs, alcohol, and gambling, as you would be any other thing. And so from this document right now, just focusing on step number 1 or tip number 1, they need to know, if this is your expectation, we're really hoping that it is, that you expect them not to try alcohol until they're age 21. We would like you to be overt and say, my expectation is that you don't use drugs, and my expectation is that you don't gamble until you're of a legal age. So you'll have more time to sort through this document and look over these 5 tips, because they sort of build as far as how much skill you need. But number 1, we're here to help you build those skills. We're a phone call away for you individually to call us. And also that you need to just be really clear with your kids. During COVID, there's going to be less opportunity for them to get prevention at school. So at home, you're not going to be a full-fledged prevention specialist, but you can start building those conversations.
Thanks, Amy. I think that's a great transition, because we talk about why it's important and we understand the why, but how do we do this? What does prevention actually look like? So I'm really thankful that you could talk about as a caregiver role, so as taking care of someone else, or being a parent or a guardian and those types of things. But when we think about the individual, Lindsay, what can we do as an individual within these families, within these schools, within these communities to practice prevention? What does that look like?
Of course. So I think really practicing that prevention comes down to instilling resiliency. So that goes back to the risk and protective factors like we talked about before. And what that is, the risk factors are sort of all the things that you have stacked against you. So that could be being raised in a household with individuals who are substance users, or having a parent become incarcerated, or having a low interest in school. There's a whole number of things that could be your risk factors. But your protective factors is hopefully a much longer than what your risk factors are. So for the individual, that can look like a lot of different things. And starting with getting involved with pro-social activities. So by pro-social activities, Eric, if you could share the infographic I sent over to you, that would be helpful. But it starts with being active in your community. So here you can see, this isn't an all-knowing list of ways to build resiliency, just a few here. But I really feel like once an individual or a child, adult, whatever it might be, is able to really understand and master each of these things that are in front of you, it's really showing that there is proof of resiliency. So we'll just pick relationships. If they're able to build positive relationships with people who also have a healthy standpoint in their life, that is one form of showing that resiliency is present. If they take a strong liking to whatever their culture is, if they're involved with dance, or they like to do their hair a certain way or dress a certain way and they're proud of that, if they have pride in where they came from and the community that they were brought up in, that's showing a sense of resiliency. As Josh said before, one of the highest risk factors right now in the Pennsylvania Youth Survey was having a low attachment to their community. So once they have a sense of pride of where they came from, they're going to start respecting things that are around them and becoming more involved with different programs or activities that are offered to them. If we can get somebody to the point of having strong conflict resolution skills, that's also going to be a point of proving that resiliency is present in that child's life. So these are just a few here in front of you, but the list can go on forever. If you just do a Google search for resiliency factors or protective factors, you'll see so many different options that prove that there is resiliency within everybody that's around you. It's just a matter of really fine tuning and developing each of those skills. So every person is going to be different. For myself, it might be getting better at painting or cooking. For a child, it's going to be building the tallest Lego tower or riding their bike the fastest. But once they have something that they're, like I said, really tuned into, and that they can start to develop a passion for, it's going to direct them away from other habits that might not be as healthy.
That makes sense. And we'll make sure everyone has access to that document Lindsay shared. Thank you. So again, back to Lindsay's point is communities are made up of individuals. So on the communal level, how do we practice prevention, Josh?
It shows up in the community in a whole bunch of different ways. First of is community education, which happens in a couple of different ways. It can be health fairs. Prevention is all over the place at health fairs, from folks like myself who are there talking about drug or alcohol prevention. Some of those other community agencies, they have free health screenings lots of times. So just in general, promoting good health in a community. And when we talk about community education, we're talking about educating everyone from individuals within the community up to politicians and stakeholders that help make big decisions for entire communities. It also has community gatherings like National Night Out, which unfortunately this year, again, with COVID restrictions, is not a thing. But when we can get back together in community outings, those things are great ways to promote pro-social behavior and that connectedness we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. It can show up in the form of billboards. If you drove around Lancaster or Lebanon County in the last year, you would have seen billboards with Compass Mark's message on it, different messaging about prevention around those two counties. And it's really about balancing all the messages that people are hearing, because messages come from whatever. So we want to make sure that the positive messages are outweighing what some of those negative messages may be. And maybe what are some of those negative messages that are out there is every time we talk about young people in schools, Deb can attest to this, all we hear about is young people are doing drugs and young people are drinking. When again, if we look at our Pennsylvania Youth Survey, most of them are making the right choices. 86-ish, 87-ish% of them have not used drugs, alcohol, or marijuana in the last 30 days. So if we're social norming, we want to make sure that we're getting the message out there that while kids and substances is an issue, the vast majority of kids are making the right choices, and that's the message we want to lift up. The other thing about prevention is grassroots and local groups that are starting things, because prevention is a local thing. What works in one community isn't going to work in another community. What's a problem in one community may not be a problem in the next community. So finding what's local to you and getting involved. That's really how we do prevention on a community level. And last but not least, just being a good neighbor. Deb had talked about that, again, there's vast research that shows that children will do better if they have that relationship with a nurturing and caring adult. Sometimes that comes in a school. Sometimes Amy said that comes from home. Sometimes it comes from the guy who lives next door. It's just being a good neighbor, making relationship, getting to know who lives around you. If you see someone in your community, a little kid, and they have a baseball uniform on, ask them how their game went. Just asking those questions, being a good neighbor and forging relationships is one of the best way to do most basic prevention on the broadest level.
That makes a lot of sense. Deb, Josh had alluded to what it could potentially look like in schools. What does prevention look like in schools? I know that you get to work with a lot of different teams of you're essentially training the trainer, but can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure, it can be a wide variety of things. It can be some of the programs that Compass Mark offers that are school-based prevention programs, like we have SET and Lions Quest. There's a wide range of programs that way. It can be a student assistance where you have trained team members that are identifying kids that are experiencing barriers to education, and then endeavoring with the team and other people that are involved, family members, classroom teachers, to remove those barriers to education. And underlining all of that all of those prevention efforts is what Josh just reiterated, that those connections, creating those connections. I was talking with a kid who is a friend of my son's who went through the SAP program. And he talked about how initially he was really hesitant about it, had an attitude that maybe this was a process that was for kids that had problems, and he didn't think that he had problems, but there were definitely barriers to his education. When he went through the SAP process, the team worked with his family to remove those barriers. He was connected with a SAP liaison through PA counseling. He was also connected with an individual on his SAP team that was checking in with him on a regular basis. And even though he graduated kind of out of the SAP program, he formed that relationship with that classroom teacher that was a SAP team member that was checking in with him, and has talked about how it meant everything to him that this adult was concerned about him and would seek him out to ask him how he was doing, how things were going. And it really was, in a way, life altering for him, because it created another really healthy, supportive, buffering kind of connection in school that was this regular kind of conversation. And he felt that it just added to that list of people that care about him. So I think that's really a beautiful example of how prevention can work through a myriad of ways within the school system.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think, you know, we sort of answered the what, why, and how. And, you know, as we're looking at prevention as this big umbrella, I think there's a lot of different pieces and parts that can be explored in a lot of different avenues, whether it's, you know, working or looking at it through the individual's eyes or a caretaker's eyes, or schools, and then at the most broad level of the community. So what I'm hoping, and I would really love to get to questions from the audience, just to make sure, because I've been watching, there's a lot of good pieces that throughout the conversation that have been posed. So I want to make sure we get to that. But I hope, you know, the questions that we posed today are just the beginning of your curiosity around prevention and how you can get involved, and what it looks like, and what it looks like in practice, and how impactful, positively impactful that it is. So thank each of you for answering my questions. I really appreciate it. And I want to make sure that we're getting to some of the questions that some of our audience has posed. So thankfully, while we were having this engaging conversation, Bevan has been monitoring the Q&A portion of that. So I'm just wondering, Bevan, can you help us to share some of the questions that have been posed so that our speakers can, you know, address them, because they're important and we want to make sure that they're addressed as well, given the time that we have.
Sure, absolutely. So David has a really great question. David is concerned primarily about kiddos in this COVID environment. And, you know, we've talked a lot about the value of connection and support. He's wondering, you know, how can we fill that gap? You know, if school doesn't open in person, what else can sort of cut the mustard to help kids stay safe in that environment? I don't know if you want to answer some of that, Deb.
Well, I think that even though schools are not maybe physically open, there's still lots of resources within the school setting that an individual could reach out to for their kids to be part of, because schools have been really deliberate about trying to keep things going in spite of the doors not being open. So I think that would be an avenue to go to contact your school and see what options they have as far as organizations, clubs, things that they can take part in, because there's still very much going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So Amy, I'm going to pop over to you. I have a great question too from Patrick. So Patrick was talking about, you know, things for folks to be proud of, that attachment and relationship piece, and how culturally some activities really are linked to substance use culture. So he's wondering how we can break that connection of this behavior or activity being aligned with or associated directly with substance use disorder.
Did Patrick give any examples? I'm not following him quite yet.
Sure. So he specifically mentioned rap and hip hop music and culture and how that can be associated with substances, violence.
Yeah, I think for parents and caregivers, sort of understanding that that a rap culture and the music and sort of the identity, is important to kids. And so even if there are individual lyrics and then all of the culture surrounding that it is possible to walk a fine line as a caregiver, to not necessarily disparage what's important to that child, to show some interest in it, to get familiar with that child's culture, and what they love, how they identify, how they see themselves. And so although I'm not, a specialist in a rap culture, as you can just look at me and know, I think just if you have a kind of relationship with your child where there's some respect, that whether you're a really touchy-feely parent or caregiver, or whether you're a pretty strict disciplinarian, or you're somewhere in the middle, that you're sort of checking yourself and coming from a place of respect for that child, of love and respect. If you do something wrong, that you're apologizing to the child, that your child sees you're on their side. No matter where you fall in your temperament, I really think just investing in listening to their music, showing them that you take an interest in them. And then I'm imagining if you have a little bit of knowledge about, let's use rap culture as an example, that there are wonderful role models. There are rappers who are wonderful role models. There are other musicians who are wonderful role models. So sort of steering a little bit towards the people who are showing respect for other people. But I would say the worst thing you could probably do is just overtly judge what your child's interested in. So I know that's very general, but I hope that's helpful.
Right. And Bevan, I'd like to respond to that as well,
Sure.
because I saw in the Q&A that, the reference to rap, skateboarding, those kind of things that are associated maybe with substance use. What I have found in having a 17-year-old son that is a skater dude is that it's, there really isn't a lot of relationship there with substance use. It's about being in control of your body and how you move your body, and exploring different things that you can do on that board and pushing boundaries. And for me, it has been having lots of conversations with him about what he loves about skating, because he loves skating.
Yeah.
What that does for him and how it makes him and his skater dude friends feel. So I think that a lot of times it's really asking a lot of questions about what it is about this that's so appealing, and then really becoming familiar with it yourself and understanding it and gaining more of a knowledge base about that music or that activity, outside of what our preconceived notions might be about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Lindsay, I received a question here about the continuum, and what opportunity does the experience of of incarceration provide across that continuum from prevention, intervention, and treatment? So I'm hoping you can share a little bit about that experience of incarceration as being really an ideal point for intervention, not just for someone who's incarcerated, but also for their family.
Of course. So I do spend quite a bit of time in our local prison here in Lancaster County Prison. And they offer lots of great programs that are tailored towards each individual. So somebody who comes in and is dealing with maybe a substance use disorder will have access to things like AA, a drug and alcohol group, a mental health group, and they can really start integrating their treatment from the time that they become incarcerated. Now, it's not going to be the same as a daily inpatient treatment or anything like that. Usually they're a once a week type of deal. But from there, they're really able to realize that staying connected with their family could be a big part of their treatment. And in turn, that's also going to help the child and the rest of the family begin to recover as well. Because research shows that as long as there was already an established positive relationship before somebody became incarcerated, the continuation of that is only going to improve things. It's not going to make it, the whole world fall apart because of where a person is living. So really utilizing those different groups that the prison system does offer. Once a person begins to transition out of prison, which we say that reentry begins day one when they become incarcerated, they're already preparing to leave prison. At the point when they are actually released and leaving, that is a great time, if not beforehand would be wonderful, to connect them with different programs that will help them on the outside. So whether that's getting them set up with a treatment group or some other sort of rehab services that can really help them live a healthy and safe life on the outside. That can also look like getting them connected to a case manager, somebody to make sure that they're making it to their appointments, making it to see their probation officer, making sure that they have all their basic needs met. When a person is released from prison, there's so many things that the average person who's never been through it doesn't think about. It can be really, really difficult to get things as simple as an ID card so that they can get, so that they can get into housing, or so that they're able to go down to the grocery store if they don't have their bank card. It can be really difficult to get a bank card without getting an ID or without having an ID. So there's all these small barriers that a case manager or somebody who's familiar with breaking through these barriers can really help them with. And the same goes for the family and the child on the outside as well. Making sure that all those basic needs are met and that they have strong support systems, whether that's from family members, somebody else in the community, or different agencies like us here at Compass Mark that can really help point them in the right direction.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think that's definitely the recurring theme here today, is that balance of risk and resiliency, whether it's in school or at home, in the community, trying to make sure that groups and individuals are receiving protective factors so that no one ever has to become addicted. I think that's such a powerful statement. When I first started in prevention, I think Amy actually said that to me. Think about it. No one ever has to become addicted. That really is powerful. And when prevention is done well and we all are effective in our role in prevention, wherever we're found in that prevention spectrum, that's possible. So pretty hopeful, Katie.
Yeah, I agree. And I honestly, it's, as a moderator, it's my job to keep an eye on the time, Bevan, but I think that's a really wonderful place to end. I think it really encapsulates and gives us a really good answer as to the, what is prevention? Why is prevention important, and how do we do it? And we've heard that echoed and resonated in each one of, Josh and Deb and Lindsay and Amy's responses. It really is that balancing act and the importance of the risk and resiliency factors, between the two. So I want to thank each one of you for spending the morning with us and explaining that and helping guide us through that conversation. I know there's a few questions that we didn't get to today, and like I prefaced at the beginning, we will be sending the recording afterwards, and we will take any of those questions that we were unable to answer today and include that within the follow-up piece. Additionally, if there are individuals on the panel or even on our team in its entirety, what I'll also do is include contact information for each one of the speakers that you've you've heard from today, so you are able to follow up with any specific questions that you may have. But from the organization and from myself, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that it piques your interest into learning more and sharing some of the resources that we were able to cover today. And if you can just keep an eye out for an email from me with all of the information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Amy said, we're a phone call away, we're an email away, and we're happy to be here amongst you and the community. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.